There has been a lot of buzz around the Tkachuk brothers thanks to their performance at the Four Nations face-off, but today we are going to talk about another pair of brothers generating some buzz as the trade deadline approaches. We are going to debate, should the Nashville Predators be a part of a deal that reunites Luke and Brayden Schenn? We're going to talk about that and preview tonight's game against the reigning Stanley Cup champions.
You're Locked On Predators, your daily podcast on the Nashville Predators, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to the Locked On Predators podcast. Thanks so much for making us your first listen of the day. We are a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Want to kick off this game day episode shouting out our Locked On Predators insiders and our everydayers who tune in to talk Nashville Predators hockey with us. I am Ann Kimmel. I'm a writer and co-host with Penalty Box Radio and Friends. I have a partner in crime.
You do. I'm Emma Lingen, and I'm the Predators site editor and reporter for the Hockey News.
Emma, there has been a ton of buzz about those Tkachuk brothers after the whole Four Nations face-off. But today we're going to talk about the buzz around another set of brothers, one that we know very well. We're going to be talking about the rumor around the Schenn brothers and the trade deadline. We also want to preview tonight's game. Oh, friends, it's against the Stanley Cup champion Florida Panthers. It's going to be so great. But we are going to kick off. We're going to kick off talking about Luke Schenn. And I have to tell you, Luke Schenn, one of my favorite players to talk about, very physically intimidating. Like, if you think he is large on the ice, in real life, he is like Fred Flintstone on steroids. It's just a ginormous dude.
Big dude. He could fit very well in my big and tall chair.
That he is exactly who the big and tall chair is made for. Luke Schenn is that guy. But have to tell you just what a terrific person Luke Schenn is. Very tough on the ice, very physical on the ice, not afraid to mix it up. Just 5 stars. Highly recommend Luke Schenn. 10 out of 10, Luke Schenn. Emma and I were talking about this before the podcast. We're just going to give you a little peek behind the curtain on one of the things that happens game day. So after every NHL game, you are assigned or you award 3 stars of the game. And of course, when you're at a Nashville Predators game, they come out and they skate and they throw t-shirts. But every single game, the NHL requires 3 stars of the game. Here's what you may not know. That's actually selected by a member of the media. So you are kind of randomly assigned, hey, this is your game. You need to pick the 3 stars of the game. Saturday night, if you were at the game, I don't know that this made it onto the broadcast, but you may have been surprised to see that Luke Schenn, ladies and gentlemen, 3rd star of the game, baby. 3rd star of the game. What you didn't see and what was so delightful is how tickled Luke Schenn was to be named a star of the game. It was like one of the highlights of the season for me, Emma, going in there and seeing Luke Schenn being like 3rd star of the game.
He was like, wow, really? Like he was floored, but in the best way. He was very happy, which is nice to see. Especially from a grizzled veteran like that they still get excited about things like that. But yeah, he's a guy who doesn't, obviously that's not his game to really show up on the score sheet. But I will say Luke Schenn is a guy who caught a lot of heat from me specifically. I'm putting my hands up on this one because last season I ragged on him quite a bit for not fitting in Andrew Brunette's system. I'm like, he's slow. He commits turnovers. He doesn't fit. He skates like he's got a piano on his back. What are we doing? This doesn't make sense. And this year, he has actually been one of the most consistent players on this team.
Mm-hmm.
Now, of course, last year he had that injury that he suffered in the first game of the season and he missed a while. He had to have surgery and, came back. This year, though, he's been really consistent again on a team that has been lacking a little bit of everything, if we're honest. But I think that, you went out in theory, when you go out and you add the pieces that they did, it's like, okay, you know where the goals are going to come from. Where's the defense going to come from? And Luke Schenn has really stepped up as a defense, a true stay-at-home, shut-down defenseman. He's been playing top pairing minutes with Roman Josi. Still, again, the things that I have said in, criticism of him before have not changed. He is kind of slow, and he does, it just doesn't really fit. He's not the youngest guy, but I still think that he has been, a positive this season in, a team that has been lacking a lot of positives.
And I like that you point out the positives on the ice, because when you talk about Luke Schenn, we can wax poetic about the positives of him in the locker room. And really and truly, when we say, like, if there is a voice in there that everybody wants to hear from or everybody listens to, Luke Schenn has to be at the top of that list. This is a guy who's played 1,052 NHL games. He's won 2 Stanley Cups with Tampa Bay and Steven Stamkos. And his career has been the hard career. This has not been a storybook easy career. Luke Schenn was drafted 5th overall in 2008 by Toronto, but there were periods of time in his career where he found himself in the AHL and didn't know if he would be able to work his way back into the NHL. I always refer to him as the Kevin Bacon of the NHL. Everybody is 6 degrees from Luke Schenn. He's played for Toronto and Philadelphia and the LA Kings and Arizona and Anaheim and Vancouver and Tampa Bay and Nashville. Like, any away media that comes in talks to Luke Schenn, because everybody knows Luke Schenn.
Everyone knows Luke Schenn.
Everybody. He's like my dad at the Warren County Fair in Pennsylvania. Everybody knows him.
That's right. And like super popular, and for good reason. Like you said, he's just a genuinely, really good guy. But sometimes you just rattled off all those teams that he played for. Sometimes, still, I find myself, I'm like, oh yeah, I forgot he played for them. And it's like with a new team comes up, and it's like probably faster to say, who hasn't he played for?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. I got a chance to talk with Schenn before the break and had an article out at penaltyboxradio.com if you want to check it out. But just really cool conversation with Luke Schenn. Really interesting, his superstition with the Stanley Cup and a straw. That's all I'm going to tell you. It was really interesting. But the rumor circulating now, Emma, Elliot Friedman, we listening. We hear you talking. He is saying that he's hearing that there are some teams that are intrigued at the idea of reuniting defenseman Luke Schenn with younger brother Brayden Schenn at the trade deadline. Now, I have to say, while I hate the idea of losing Luke Schenn, I think this is really interesting. Of course, Luke is older brother. He's 35, Brayden 33, which I know you all think is ancient in hockey years, but really it's not. Brayden Schenn, 2 games away from his 1,000th NHL game, which I think is really, really cool. I honestly hope that Luke doesn't play and can maybe go and watch that, but I haven't looked at the schedule enough to see. But yeah, so that's sort of the rumor going around. There are teams, contending teams, that are like, hey, what about reuniting Luke and Brayden? Now, Luke Schenn's contract he's got 1 more year, 1 more season after this one, $2.75 million cap hit. Brayden, $6.5 million cap hit through 2027-28. So a little bit longer contract there. Coming up, we're going to just talk about it from Nashville's perspective. Emma and I are going to discuss and debate the pros and cons, and there are some, of moving Luke Schenn. Plus, we are going to preview tonight's game against Florida. Today's episode is brought to you by our friends at Indeed. You just realized your business needed to hire someone yesterday. How can you find amazing candidates fast? It's easy. Just use Indeed. When it comes to hiring, Indeed is all you need. Stop struggling to get your job post seen on other sites. Indeed's sponsored jobs put your post at the top of the page and help you reach the right candidates faster. It's really difficult to be in that spot where you need the right hire yesterday. The pressure's on, and every day without the right person is a setback. That is exactly when Indeed sponsored jobs come in handy. They make sure your post is seen by the right candidates right now. You can speed up your hiring process with a $75 sponsored job credit right now. Just go to indeed.com/locked on and you can support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Again, that's indeed.com/locked on. Hiring, Indeed is all you need. All right, Emma, I think a lot of people were where you were last season as far as like the Luke Schenn-o-meter. But in a season where there's really few bright spots, Luke Schenn has kind of been an on-ice bright spot for the Nashville Predators. So when the idea is presented to you, like let's set aside the Brayden thing because, we're just not going to vote on that. When the idea is presented to you, trading Luke Schenn at the trade deadline, and I mean, if you need to factor in the Brayden thing, you can. What's your initial reaction to the idea of trading Luke Schenn?
Well, I think that my reaction has to do with where the Predators are right now. This is not a playoff team. Schenn's contract is up after next season. I would think that now, if the Predators are a playoff team next season, that changes everything. But if they're not a playoff team next season, or potentially even if they are, Luke Schenn could be a deadline, like a trade deadline chip anyway, because he's going to be on an expiring contract. He'll be 36 years old. You're probably not going to re-sign him. Kind of the same way we're talking about Gus Nyquist right now. I think that he has been a bright spot for the team on the ice this year, but I'm not against trading him if you can get something really solid in return. And it sounds like, from Elliott's report, there's enough interest it's not just one team that has said,
Right.
hey, you know what would be fun?
Right.
If we united the Schenn brother. No, it's like multiple teams are expressing interest in this. So knowing that there is a growing market for this and the demand is going to be higher, and the offers might start coming in, and knowing the position that Nashville's in right now, if they can get a good enough return, and by good enough return, I mean, I don't think you need more draft picks. I think you need blue chip prospects. I think you need NHL ready talent. I think that you need, again, this team is oddly weak defensively this year, which is not something we're used to with the Predators. But I think that you need to, if Barry Trotz is sticking to this plan, the plan has not gone as expected in the first year. So he is now shifting focus to the future. If you're the Predators and you're getting trade calls about, quite frankly, anyone on that roster who doesn't have trade protection, you have to answer the call. You have to listen and see what people are offering, because at this point, there's no real compelling reason to hang on to those guys.
My biggest fear, and I go back and forth because I think that there are pros and cons to this. My biggest fear when it comes to trading basically not anybody, but a lot of the people like a Luke Schenn, is that we talked about this on yesterday's show, we don't really know anything about this team. And if next season, perhaps under a different coach, you may say, you know what, I wish we had a big, physical, experienced, stay-at-home defenseman. Because in Nashville's pipeline, which has a lot of potentially good defensemen in it, I'm talking Tanner Molendyk, y'all, go on Twitter and try to find the assist. I'll see if I can link it on the Locked On Predators Twitter feed. The assist from Tanner Molendyk in the Medicine Hat game last night. Oh my gosh. I mean, you could hear Hockey Angels singing. It was just glorious. But Tanner Mullendijk, Andrew Gibson, Ryan Ufko, locked on Mark Del Gaizo. You don't have big physical stay-at-home defensemen. And what worries me about trading Schenn is if this wackadoodle season that we're in right now ends and there is maybe a coaching change or some roster adjustments and Nashville really can put it together next season, Schenn is, minus Andreas Englund, he's the only big physical stay-at-home traditional defenseman the Predators have. That's what worries me.
Yes, but you're not wrong. But I think that two things. Number one, Schenn was not going to be part of the long-term plan here. Beyond next season, he wasn't ever going to be part of the plan. Number two, big stay-at-home defensive defensemen are actually not that hard to come by. I think, I don't mean to say that like I'm not trying to downplay it or say that, well, dime a dozen, just pick up anyone. But I think that there are more players like Luke Schenn out there that are, and I'm not trying to downplay what he brings to the table. He has the experience, he has, but, and everyone's unique. But I do think that if you're looking at Luke Schenn, where his biggest asset is his size and physicality, I think you can get that elsewhere. It's less, replacing Luke Schenn is not that tall of a task for me as it would be if you were replacing Roman Yossi or something. Like that's a big jump, but you know what I mean? Like it's the skill set is maybe not quite as specialized. He's not a special teams guy. He's not a power play quarterback. He's not, like I just think that he's a guy who is replaceable. And that's not to downplay all of the good that he's done, but I do think that his profile, his player type, I think is going to be easier to come by. And, like I said, you get someone maybe a little bit younger, a little bit more term. I'm not concerned. Again, you also, once he's healthy next year, you have Jeremy Lauzon back there too. That's
very
another
true.
Big physical guy. So it's like, again, if the biggest concern, which is a very valid one, is size and physicality, I think you can easily find that elsewhere. And I wouldn't necessarily be that concerned about finding it immediately because, again, the Predators are not a playoff team. They're not like it's, just reevaluating the offseason, and I think that there are ways to sort of like recoup what you lose there. So I think if you can get a good enough return, I think Barry Trotz has to take the call, but I think that he has to listen. And I'm sure he is, now that he knows, as everyone else does, that this is something that's starting to pick up a lot of interest with multiple teams around the league. I think that I could see it. Depending on how badly these teams want it, and he would be a really good add to a playoff team. Again, for the Predators last year, he had a good playoffs, and we saw that.
Good. Yeah, he is good for postseason.
And Barry Trotz said when he signed him, he remembered that when he played for the Lightning, he was giving the Islanders fits during the playoffs when Barry Trotz was the coach there. So it's, he could be very valuable to a contender in that regard. Plus, in theory, Barry Trotz could ask for more in return because he does have that extra year on his contract beyond this one. So, see what teams are willing to offer, but I'm not saying, oh yeah, absolutely trade him, get whatever you can for him. But I think that if you get a good enough offer, I think that that's a trade you make.
It's interesting. I asked our Locked On Predators insider community, hey, where are you guys on a trade for Luke Schenn? What are the pros and cons? And I would say across the board, the overwhelming response is love him, would hate to see him go, love what he brings in the locker room into leadership, but it might be it would be a move that I would hate, but I would completely understand. And one of our insiders, Leonora, had a really good point, something that you just touched on. She said, I would for sure trade him before Lozon. I don't think you could trade both of those guys. I think this is, Lee said, the original criticism, and you touched on this, is saying that, he doesn't skate well enough for the system. Lee says, I think since he's proven his value outside of his skating abilities, and could be a very important pillar if we were to move toward a new coach or system. He says, I don't want to see him go and would be afraid that it would be a small indication that we are sticking to Bruno in the system. So there is almost this sense of like, well, maybe, if you trade Luke Schenn, if you make some moves at the trade deadline, maybe that means that Barry Trotz is kind of moving away from this. No, we gotta just have all this speed. I don't know. So much is unpredictable at this trade deadline, but I think that you're right. I think if Barry Trotz's phone rings, he has to answer the phone, and there have to be very few conversations that he does not take very seriously, and including one about Luke Schenn, which I think you and I hate to see him leave the locker room. Great guy. But like you said, this is a guy who's been great in the postseason. And if you're a contending team and you're thinking like, we're great in our top 4 defensemen, but we might want like a little bit of size on that third pairing, like you to meet Luke Schenn.
Yeah. I mean, Luke Schenn also, as I mentioned, has been playing on the top pair with Roman Josi as of late. That's not where you want Luke Schenn.
That's just not. No. That's a statement about where the Nashville Predators are. That's not a statement about Luke Schenn.
Correct. Absolutely correct. And the fact that he is a right shot defenseman, those are hard to come by, and I think that only increases his value on the trade market. So all these things, I think that, again, I'm not like, dear God, yes, get him off this roster, but I think that he's a guy that you actually could get a pretty good return for.
Yeah. And I think that's the key. Get a good return. Don't just clean house. Get a good return. Coming up, we are going to talk about another brother from a set of brothers everybody loves, even my kids, the Tkachuk brothers. Will we see Matthew Tkachuk tonight? We're going to preview that Florida Panthers game. If you have thoughts about trading Luke Schenn or any of the other topics that we talk about here when it comes to the Nashville Predators, we want to invite you to join our Locked On Predators insider community via subtext. You will get a chance to share your thoughts one-on-one with Emma and I via text. You can chat with us after the podcast, ask questions, and discuss breaking news when it happens. To join our great insider community, you can click on the link in our bio or check out the description for this episode. All right, Emma, coming off of a 5-0 loss to the New Jersey Devils, you know what would be fun? Playing the reigning Stanley Cup champions. Can't wait. Tonight, Florida Panthers come to town as of the time of this recording. Don't know that we're going to see Matthew Tkachuk, Emma.
No, it sounds like we're not. He did not play in the Panthers' first game back against Seattle, which they lost 2-1. Funny side note here, looking on, now I need to find it. I think it was ESPN. You can tell which headlines on like certain news stories are written by AI because it's like hobbled Tkachuk sits as Panthers fall to Kraken. Like hobbled Tkachuk. That's how we're going to go with it.
Is that
not injured or not, no, hobbled. He's hobbled. He's on hobbled reserve right now. And I think as of time of recording, they're, doing all the testing, all the things. They think he will be out long term. Don't know if that means for the entire season, into the playoffs potentially, but either way, it does seem very likely that we're not going to see him against Nashville. So that is good news, but less good news is that the Panthers are still a very, very good very, very deep, very offensively threatening team, even without Matthew Tkachuk. They still have Sam Reinhart, they have Sasha Barkov, they have, Sam Bennett. They're just a very complete, very deep team. And they already gave Nashville a very hard time when the Predators went to Florida earlier this season. So things have not exactly gone well for Nashville since then. So
Yeah.
it'll be fun.
What could go wrong? The thing that I think is so striking about this Florida Panthers team is that they have what I call quality leads and depth. Like, they don't necessarily have, and I mean, no disrespect when I say this, but this is not a team that has a Connor McDavid or a Sidney Crosby or a Nathan McKinnon. But what they have is a posse of quality leads. Like you mentioned, Reinhart, Barkov, Carter Verhaeghe, Sam Bennett, and their depth players, I'm like, I would take them in our middle six and not bat an eye. I mean, their depth players, so good. Anton Lundell, Evan Rodriguez, Jesper Boquist, Gustav Forsland, their depth, I'm a little envious of. On paper, Nashville is in a similar situation. They don't, of course, have a Crosby or a McKinnon or a McDavid, but they have quality leads, quote unquote, with Stamkos and Marchessault and Forsberg and O'Reilly and Yossi, except none of them have been able to produce. And depth, Florida's depth absolutely overshadows Nashville. I mean, that's just what's real.
Yeah. And this a team that, they won a Stanley Cup with their depth last year, and not much has changed there. And I think that they've just, they've still got the stellar goaltending. They've still got really strong defense. They've got an incredibly deep forward group. Like you said, they don't have a one superstar. They have several, and that is their strength, the strength in numbers. And so that's where you lose a guy like Matthew Tkachuk. Yes, of course it hurts. They're one of their top 2 scorers this season. So it hurts them, but it doesn't completely destroy them the way it would, if another team were to lose a superstar like that. So, I mean, Matthew Tkachuk not playing is not exactly giving me the sigh of relief that you might think for this team facing off against the Predators, but hey,
we'll take whatever advantage.
Sure.
Throw us a bone. Let's see what the team will do with it. Yeah. You mentioned that they are coming off of a loss to the Seattle Kraken. One of the biggest things in that game that made a difference was the goaltending for Seattle. Joey Decord, just lights out, just incredible saves. And so this is a game where I look at it and I say, can we please have some more Colorado Avalanche UC Saros? Because that is going to be key if the Predators want to stay in this game, because there is not a line that cannot score for Florida. And so goaltending, I think, is going to be huge in this game. What else do you think is going to be big in this game if Nashville wants to stay competitive?
Well, the goaltending is going to be big. We probably are going to see Saros, so that is a good sign. I mean, because didn't they start Scott Wedgwood when they played in Florida earlier this year? I'm pretty sure they did. So the Panthers have not seen Saros yet this year, so that's a good thing.
Yeah.
The defense was horrendous against the Devils, as evidenced by the 5 goals that they scored. So let's maybe play some defense in front of UC Saros. Just a thought. And then, I mean, it's the same thing we've been saying all year, but I mean, talk about getting scored on 5 times by the Devils. You know what they didn't do against the Devils? Score a freaking goal. So the offense needs to show up as well. If the whole concept of the best defense is good offense, if that is, I mean, that is oversimplifying it, but at a nuts and bolts level, that is Andrew Brunette's system, is the best defense is a good offense. Well, that only works as long as the offense is offensing, and the Predators offense is not. And so they've got to score some goals. And, I would like to see them defend better as well. But I think that, you gotta find the back of the net.
Yeah, especially against a team like Florida. Florida is going to score goals. I think they rank like 8th maybe in goals for per game. Yeah, 8th in goals for per game. So this is a team that scores goals to win. You're talking about Nashville getting going offensively. Max Hurst tweeted this out after the New Jersey Devils game, and it was like a knife to my heart. Steven Stamkos has gone 9 games without a point. That is the longest streak in 17 years of being an NHL player. He has not had a pointless streak longer than 5 games since the first 2 months of his career. This is unprecedented times for Steven Stamkos. And, Philip Forsberg went through a similar record-setting drought earlier in the season. Those are the guys. Those are the guys. Yes, you need your depth players to step up, especially against Florida. We talked about Evangelista really struggled against New Jersey. You got to see better from Novak and Evangelista, and you need Smith and McCarron to get those pucks turning over, and Svechkov, better game. But who you really need to see step up, you got to see Forsberg, Stamkos, Marchessault, Yossi.
If Steven Stamkos and Philip Forsberg and, Ryan O'Reilly, etc., are not scoring goals, you can't tell me that Fedor Svechkov is this team's biggest problem. That's
Right.
where you lose that. You lose that argument entirely. So, yes, Svechkov had a bad game against New Jersey. So did everyone else. But I think that, to your point, exactly, you need those guys to lead the charge, and we just haven't seen it lately.
Yeah, mystifying. It is going to be a game of hockey tonight against the Florida Panthers. I can't even pick an adjective because sure, who even knows? Sometimes Nashville plays up to their opponent after that 5-0 loss to New Jersey. This is a team that is just really struggling on ice. I think mentally it's very tough. So I just can't predict what we're going to see tonight against Florida. But here's the good news. No matter what happens, Emma and I are going to be back tomorrow, and we're going to recap whatever we see with our one FCC compliant word to describe the game. We're also going to look around the Western Conference and check in on some storylines there. Emma, before we log off on this game day, will you let everyone know where they can find you and your work?
Yes, you can find me on social media at Emma_Lingen, and you can find my work at The Hockey News.
And you can find me on social media at AnnK_Mama on Ice. You can find my work with Penalty Box Radio as well. Friends, that is going to do it for this Tuesday episode of the Locked On Predators podcast. Thank you so much for making us your first listen of the day. We're going to be back tomorrow. We're going to recap whatever we see tonight at Bridgestone Arena. We'll see you then.